So I haven't prepared a presentation as such. I thought it was going to be much more informal, just to talk to you about my experiences and what has led me to be a businesswoman and a chef and an author. So I'll probably just start with a bit of background, really. So I am originally from Southampton. I am a local Southampton girl, born and bred, and both parents came over from the island of Mauritius in the 70s. And basically growing up here, I ended up going to Taunton's College, hence the reason why I'm involved today. I'm an ex-Taunton's College girl, and did all my education in Southampton, and then finally moved to London and did a psychology degree, actually, over in London, and stayed up there for a couple of years. I then decided to move back to Southampton, and I love the illustration. Thank you. Rebecca's doing these lovely little illustrations. I moved back to Southampton to work on a housing project. I'm really passionate about equality and diversity. So I ended up working in the field of inclusion, diversity and equality for around 8 to 10 years in third sector, private sector and public sector. So around policy and strategy and project management. I really loved what I did. I was really passionate about changing the world a small bit at a time in different businesses and providing opportunity to those who wouldn't ordinarily get access to industries. I always found that I felt quite fortunate being a woman of colour, being born in Southampton and being able to get a degree and progress in my career, essentially. I always felt that it was something that my parents instilled in me at a very young age, that, you know, they'd traveled so far and they'd worked so hard for their kids to get an education here in the UK. So I felt really compelled, and I felt really motivated to make sure that I sort of did them proud, essentially. But I was always interested in cooking. And when I was 14 years old, I remember it was a time when you could choose what work experience you'd like to do. And it was through a company called Trident back then. And everyone's nodding, yeah. So I applied through Trident, and I actually wanted to go into catering and be a chef. And my mum was like, how dare you? We didn't come to this country for you to be a chef or a caterer. You know, go and choose something a bit more, you know, law, accountancy, finance, you know, the classics. And so I ended up pursuing a career in psychology and project management, essentially. And I think really at the time, I knew that I was passionate about food. I knew that I was passionate about feeding people and eating, primarily eating, if I'm honest with you. Hi, Ahmed. Nice to see you. Well, hear you. I'm just starting my story. We only started a few minutes ago.
Hi there.
Hi. We're going to be quite a small group. So if you do want to show your face, then obviously go ahead. But if you don't, that's not a problem. What I'll do is I'll just do a little story and then open it up for a Q&A and have a nice conversation. I think that's probably the best approach. So basically, I decided to, you know, just cook for friends and family. I was really passionate about food. I just never thought that it would be something that I could have a career from, and not necessarily a career that would make my parents proud. And I think coming from an ethnic background, it's another layer of pressure that we're under, that you feel that you have a generational responsibility to do parents proud. And so you can't always just go on a whim and do something that you really love, because actually it's about creating roots. It's about, you know, supporting other people in the family. It's not always just about yourself. So I spent about 10 years working and saving money, and I was living in London. I bought my first house, and I basically had what I call a quarter life crisis. So I was edging towards the age of 30, and I just felt that it was time for my career to change and for my life to change. And all my friends kept saying how good I was at cooking and how easy it was for me and how easy it was for me to connect people through food. And I then realized that that was quite a unique tool that I don't think not everyone is born with. So I realized it was quite an innate skill, and I love it. Like, it literally makes me happy feeding and eating people. And so I quit my job, which seems quite irrational, but I had saved money, and I'd saved enough money for a year. And I thought, if I can pay my mortgage off for a year, then my mum won't shout at me for being totally irrational. And I ended up spending that year doing MasterChef. So I spent 3 months to 4 months doing the show. I mean, I'm going to just whistle stop tour the show basically. So I did the show, but you can ask loads of questions about MasterChef afterwards. I did the show, and after finishing the show, you basically have a hiatus of not being able to tell anyone that you'd won the show, because you'd signed your life away basically through a massive BBC contract about that big and thick. So I ended up sort of nose diving into the world of food and media, essentially, and becoming almost like a food presenter. So I did lots of food presenting, going to lots of cooking shows across the UK. This Morning, Sunday Brunch, all of the morning shows and some of the evening cookery shows as well. I worked on Food Network. Back in the day, I think there was a BBC food program as well on Sky. So I did a lot of TV and also radio, loved all of that. But there was this burning desire that even though I'd won MasterChef and I was really proud of my achievement, the desire was to share my food with more people and to connect people through food that was diverse and different. So I quit London, took everything I knew, and came back to Southampton and decided to open my restaurant. So I opened my business back in 2016. And at that point, even though I had a lot of business experience in the world of like project management and diversity and inclusion, I literally had no idea how to run a restaurant at all, you know, and you know, the whole industry was brand new to me. I knew how to cook, and I knew that that's all I needed to do. But there was this massive gap of knowledge that had to be, it was a trial and error process, if I'm honest with you. So I remember that first year being the most stressful year of my life. And I actually fell pregnant within 2 months of opening the business. And I only realized I was pregnant because my taste had changed and everything tasted different. And I was like, oh my God, what's going on? So in that year, it made me actually very quickly think of, how do I sustain this business and how can there be longevity in the business without me physically being there? Because even though you have a good idea, an idea is only ever good as the business itself. So ideas don't necessarily create a business, it's all the processes that do. And I think that's sometimes the difference between having a successful concept versus having a successful business. And I think those two are not always so aligned. So in that year, whilst I was pregnant, I had to think of ways of making sure that the food could retain its quality, could retain its consistency, and that the customer wouldn't know whether it was me cooking or whether it was a different person. So I went ahead and basically transformed about, I don't know, 25, 35 years of recipe experience into what we call the La Case Maman Bible. We can call it the Torah or the Quran, however you want to call it. And it's basically a full guide of grams, recipes to the gram, that will explain to everyone who, oh, sorry, I've got some feedback on someone. Yeah, I think basically it was this guide that meant that we would have a consistent approach to cooking the same menus over and over again. And I trained up the entire kitchen, trained up the front, and essentially created these kind of practice documents where if something went wrong, we just thought, right, what went wrong? What was a process of failure? So let's track that back and find out what else could go wrong. And if we could map out all the things that go wrong, and then we'll have a process behind anything. So, you know, simple things like fire alarms. Normally people go into a business and all of this is all done for them. You know, you'll have all your policies and strategies in place, but none of this was there. The business didn't exist before my food. So it did take a very long time to set everything up. I think being an entrepreneur takes a lot of willpower. It certainly means a lot of sleepless nights. But if you flip that over, the kind of reward that you get from being an entrepreneur and knowing that you can take a concept into fruition and knowing it's sustainable is something that's, something that makes me quite proud, actually. I always think about leaving a legacy. And when I think about the legacy that I would like to leave, I always think about the connection that food has amongst people and amongst people that wouldn't ordinarily sit around a table together. And I've always wanted to do that. So even though I have the restaurant, I always get involved in other types of projects, particularly around charity work, where you can bring a whole group of people that wouldn't ordinarily talk to one another. But if you bring really good food, that's when the conversation starts. So food is really very much at the core of every part of my offering as a businesswoman. But I think in terms of all the other aspects of the work that I do, running the restaurant is just one aspect. I am also a full-time mother. So I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I often do get asked, how do you manage that? And I can definitely explain that in more detail if anyone is interested. And the other aspects of my work revolve around media and TV. So I do presenting and radio as well, but I also do lots of curation. So creating recipes and food development for a number of brands and projects and partnerships. So it's an incredibly varied life. It's incredibly creative. And a lot of the time my inspiration comes from others. And I remember, I think it may have been a Rick Stein documentary where someone asked him, do you ever get bored of food? And I think his response was, if I ever get bored of food, all I need to do is travel. It may have been Keith Floyd, actually. And I think the type of learning that we can get from witnessing other people's ways of cooking, what kind of equipment they have in their kitchen, I think the list of learning is endless in the realm of food. And so it's something that I'm hugely passionate about, something that I hadn't realized would be a career, if I'm honest with you. I hadn't realized that my joy of eating could translate into so many diverse areas of work, really. So that's it in a very brief nutshell. I think a conversation would be perfect at this stage, and you can ask me as many questions as you like about anything, really, anything that you're interested in, but in particular, obviously, food entrepreneurship and how to take an idea through to fruition, perhaps. I don't know. The floor is yours. Please ask away. Has anyone got any questions?
I think, Shelina, hello.
Hi, Lisa.
All right. Yeah, just really, amazing journey that you've clearly been on, and totally agree. Food. How many times do you have a gathering in your house and you never sit in the lounge? You're always stood in the kitchen talking around food and drinking. It's lovely. I suppose that the thing that I'm thinking about is how we can try and bring that into our communities, working, I don't know, Ahmed, Hita, Liz, where you guys work, but being in a sixth form college, it is another way, isn't it, to have the sharing of culture and background and experience, and as you say, therefore conversation.
Absolutely.
And how we could go about doing that in our settings, in our environments, in different ways. It's quite a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I do ask that quite often, actually, and I think it has to be relevant to your group that you're working with. And I think knowing what works is the first thing, and so knowing that food brings people together is your first point of call. I think the second point of call is, what do you want to get from that gathering? What type of interaction are you hoping to achieve? So if you're thinking of sixth form, are you thinking of people who wouldn't ordinarily have the opportunity to sit with each other? Are you thinking about helping to form different friendship groups, helping people with isolation, helping people with anxiety? So one example, actually, I recently did a event over at City College, and it was organized by Cantel, and they decided to do a etiquette formal dining event. So it was for year 8s, I think. And the idea was that they would be seated on round tables and would get a 2-course dining experience. But the whole idea was for them to learn how to have a formal dining experience and eat something really delicious. The second part that came from that is actually the type of conversations that happen around that table. So if you think about the majority of people, and in fact, I just did a TED talk. I did a TED talk about 3 weeks ago at Southampton University, and the talk was all about food being at the heart of communities and the power of food in communities. And one of the things I mentioned is actually we are a nation of solitary eaters now, where the majority of our midweek meals are eaten solo. You often wait for the kids to finish, and then you think, oh, I'm going to eat a meal in peace. without them, or you're living alone and you're just not going out in the evening and you finished work really late and eat a meal on your lap. Now, there's a number of things. Not only are there physical impacts on that, but there are emotional things. So food emotionally connect people together. There's a huge social impact on having a social exchange over food. And often those social exchanges make us happier. So if you think about going out for dinner with your best friends, I know when I think about having my girlfriends around a table, it literally fills my heart with happiness before they even turn up. And the anxiety may well be, have I cooked enough food? That's normally my problem. And the answer is always yes, because they always have goodie bags. But going back to that concept that actually over at Cantel, for example, there was a knowledge that a lot of these children are not sitting eating meals on a table. They are not sitting eating meals with their family, and they're also exposed to a poor diet. They are often watching TV whilst eating. So there's like a mindless eating happening, meaning that there's an increased risk of obesity, health problems, and such like. So actually putting people around a table and supporting them to learn how to have conversations, these are skills that they're going to need further down the line. And let's think about, the disparity between people who get access to those senior roles and those people who don't. Are they not the people who are sitting around the table? And there is something that links you to that concept, have a seat at the table. I mean, what does that even mean? It's telling you something. There's a seat at the table if you're able to sit on it. But if you don't have a table, then how do you sit on it? So yeah, I think in terms of the actual roles that you may take, I mean, I don't know about anyone else in the room here, depending on which role you have within the sixth form setting, just a question around, you can do something like getting people together around food, but understanding what the aims of that type of opportunity is something that you probably need to unpick before you do something. I think also a lot of community work is all good. There's a lot of good in community, but it has to be effective and there has to be impact. And if you don't have a quantitative or qualitative approach to that, so you're not sort of really understanding why you're doing it, so it's the whys, then it becomes ineffective. So you can definitely organize a beautiful big lunch at a college and have everyone sit around and talk. What's the long-term impact and how are those lives changed in the process? So that's probably a question that you would need unpicking before you think about the further role of food within that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I can really see your previous life, and how that really feeds into that response. And I saw obviously on social media what you guys did at City with Cantel School. Absolutely brilliant idea. And I think you're right, probably as different generations actually just kind of took for granted that it was something that my parents made us do. Absolutely. We all sat and ate together. It was a family tradition, but things are so different now, aren't they, in the world? Working conditions, and
we are competing with lots of different things, digital, long hours, family, breakdown of family structure. There's lots of things. I mean, I'm having to have dinner at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with my daughter. She comes back starving and she wants her full meal, and I've got to sit there and eat. And then, I think this is probably why I've been putting on weight, because I have another meal later on in the day because I'm hungry. But I force myself to do that 4 o'clock, because if I don't do that, then I lose that opportunity with her. And she needs to see me eat and also enjoy that food as well.
I think that also can feed in, couldn't it, to, I mean, I don't know about what setting, as I say, the other people are in, but I know in my own setting at the moment, it's quite a daunting thing almost, even for some staff, to go and sit and eat in the cafe with our students sometimes, but actually just to go in and maybe staffed to go in and sit and eat their lunch and model that behaviour. And again, it is then those informal conversations that happen, isn't it? Even if it's not a fancy meal, even if it's just that we're in this space with you.
Absolutely. I think the first step is to break down those barriers, and knowing that the environment, when people are eating, there is an environment already open to having a conversation. What have you got for lunch? Oh, that looks nice. What have I got?
So true. Yeah.
And it's often the case of having those very easy conversations. Food is a conduit for all aspects of social conversation. You know, everyone is interested in food somehow. So I think the us and them mentality, knowing that you can have a better relationship with your students if you're able to break down those barriers first of all. And it does have to come from us, really, unfortunately. And it probably makes us anxious and nervous, but if you think about what it may make them feel as well.
Absolutely. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to ask Shelina?
I was just hi, I'm Liz here.
Hi, Liz.
I was just going to add a little bit about my experience of what I work for Aspire. So what I do is home tuition, so I work a little differently, but it runs from the Wickham Grange, which is one of our pupil referral units, and there are 3 within Aspire, and all of the Aspire pupil referral units provide lunch for their students, and at the Wickham Grange it's quite a small building, so there's a big table in 2 of the classrooms, and we have a good cook who cooks lunch, and it's been for years and years historically has been a very central thing to the Wickham Grange, is that the lunch is provided, a good meal for the students that come, and they sit at lunchtime. I mean, you know, they pick and choose, but they come and sit and eat, and the staff sit and eat with them, and the staff, not just the teachers, but the admin staff and everybody in the building will sit, not all at once. It's generally kind of, you know, some are on duty, some are not, but they'll sit at lunchtime and have lunch, and it has an enormous impact on the student.
I think there's also a consideration. I remember thinking about this when we did Cantel, that I then realised after had become something that I was aware of just because of my own cultural disposition, is that the at Aspire it's set up very formally, isn't it? So you have the white linen, you have knives and forks, and
no, it's not that formal.
Okay. But I had realised whilst I was having a conversation with some of the kids that actually in their own home environment, using your hands is an absolutely valid formal approach to dining. And you know, we talk about formality, but that's quite a British kind of concept of formality when we think about you know, the format of forks and spoons and knives. I mean, that even is overwhelming anyway, knowing which fork to eat with and which spoon to eat with and all of that kind of stuff. And I remember one of the kids on the table, there was some bread, and I said, pick it with your hands. How else do you want to pick up the bread? And there was a concern like, oh, do you use pincers, or do you know, how do you do this in a formal setting? And I actually said to them, whatever is your cultural formal setting is what you should be using. If it means eating with your hands, that's fine. If it means eating with a spoon, that's fine. You know, so across a lot of Southeast Asia, having rice with a spoon is completely the norm, whereas in other countries, using a fork and knife seems more appropriate. I mean, if you go to Italy and use a knife and fork on a pizza, you will get thrown out of the country. So, you know, there are so many different cultural norms when it comes to food. I know my daughter's half Moroccan, and one of the things that I love when we have Moroccan food and Mauritian food is that we can feel the temperature of the food with your hands. And so, you know, and I heard about this later actually, that medically it's really good because it means that the food that's going in you is the same as your body temperature, so it doesn't shock your body. And you know, if it's too hot for you to touch, then it generally is too hot for you to eat. So we do have moments where we eat with our hands, and I think understanding all of those nuances around culture when you're bringing people together is really valuable. And if you don't feel confident enough knowing about those cultures, the first step is having a conversation, and that in itself breaks down those barriers, really.
Yeah, I find it really interesting with the students we have in the Grange, and they'll sometimes when they're new, they often don't want to sit at the table, and they'll take something, or they'll circle it, or they'll just take the cake, disappear. But some of them, it takes some time, but eventually they'll sit down, and sometimes they don't want to. Then there's usually a main meal, and then there's bread and cheese as well, so they can choose. But it's interesting how some of them you can persuade to try different things.
Absolutely.
But it's the conversations as well, because often the kids don't say much to start with, but the staff and the adults are talking. they join in those conversations, and it's really lovely to see.
Absolutely.
It's so important. I'm another one. I've got teenage kids, but we sit around the table. But something, and they come back and say, my friends say we're weird. So we sit around the table. But top tip when you've got little kids, though, we did this. My children were small. My husband would come back and he goes, they're too tired to eat with me now, and they're all grumpy. So I said, well, in that case, we need to have breakfast together. And so when my children were little, we had breakfast together, all together, and we still do. They're now 17 and 15, but we still all have breakfast together because that's become our
routine.
Our norm. We eat evening meals together and everything now as well too. But it meant that whilst they were happy and awake, that was a good time for them. And
no, absolutely, you get the most out of them. But I do definitely think it's a lost art. I think as the family dynamics do change, we are eating less and less together, and that
we are, and it's hard to fit in. And when there's stuff going on, it's really it's hard. But some kids don't eat, and some kids don't have an experience of cooking, do they?
Absolutely.
Either, which is scary, or being cooked for even.
Yeah.
I
don't know if anyone else in the group have got any questions. Helen, Hita, or Ahmed? I think everyone's hungry.
Yes, well, thank you.
Need a little morning snack now.
Well, if we had done this in real life,
Zoom, really, isn't it?
I was going to say I would have certainly have bought some brunch items. We can do that next time.
I mean, listen, I'm up the road, Shelina, you know that. So, and if you're ever in Southampton, I can highly recommend Shelina's restaurant. It is beautiful.
Thank you.
Gorgeous, really lovely. Have you got any plans to expand your business, or is this enough at the moment?
So I had actually, I had found a unit over in Winchester that I was very close to securing, and then I had a moment of panic when I thought, actually, I'm a single mum, and I think there's a limit to how much I decide to take on nowadays. And the thought of opening a new restaurant and knowing that it would take away from what is definitely my job as a mother is something that I knew that I had to compromise. So I have taken the step to decide that actually I love wanting to do all homework with her and doing all the school runs. So I need to make sure that my work fits around her. And I definitely think that's something that women, most women at some point in their life, if they do have caring responsibilities, has to make some certain decisions around. So yeah, I've had to make a couple of decisions recently that I've realized I've said no to lots of projects that I really wanted to do, but I knew that they weren't the right time. And I think when the time's right, they'll come back.
I'm on mute, I'm not on screen.
Helen, we can still hear you.
Sorry. Am I not on mute?
You're not on mute.
Helen, sorry.
It's all right.
Do you want to jump in and ask any questions?
I was just so I'm from the primary school, so actually thinking about sharing those lunchtimes with the children at the moment, it's kind of like it's a bit of a bun fight, I suppose. Really, it's kind of rush, get them all in, get them all through. Whereas actually, we probably need to take a little bit more time, effort, and energy in actually engaging with the children, sitting down and having our lunch with them, as painful as that might be in some instances.
Oh, we've lost you, Helen. I think you've gone on. Oh, you're back.
Oh, back, as if they're not having those social opportunities at home of an evening, they're being fed in front of the telly or whatever, then that's possibly the only chance that they will have to sit and eat with an adult.
Absolutely. I think that's such a valid question, a response, Helen, because I recently did I think I went into one of the primary school kitchens in Southampton recently to do a little dinner. So we did a Mauritian menu basically for them, and it was really exciting. But honestly, I said it felt like I'd done 3 rounds with Mike Tyson. I was exhausted. I said it was the worst event that I've ever done. And I said, it feels worse than a MasterChef challenge, and everyone couldn't stop laughing. Feeding nearly 200 kids in an hour. I honestly, the respect that I have for the dinner team, the kitchen team. But I do agree. I think you are herding cattle, really. So it's quite hard to even have that moment. But whether even if it's 5 minutes, you know, and you could just sit on the table and say, right, guys, I've got a question for you all. What's your favorite thing today? Or just something that lets them engage and recognize that the table becomes a very special place to have that communication. Timing is everything though in this environment. So I don't know how it works, how it would work.
Also, what I don't know about the other people on it, but our tables are so long. You've got like a whole class worth of children sat at one long table. So yeah, trying to have those interactions and being purposeful is it's a challenge.
Yeah, no, I think at that age as well, I think as they get a little bit older, but certainly in the very early years, I know how tricky that is. But it is right though that actually often enough that may well be the only hot meal they'll have and the only time that they're sat on a table. So I do think that there needs to be something creative around that concept, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, come September, I think we might put a little bit of an expectation perhaps in our staff that once a week maybe they just spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes either eating their lunch with the children or just having that interaction.
Absolutely. Heater, sorry, I'm just going to go. I'd love to hear your story. Sorry, I've got no mic or camera. No problem. All your talk is making me hungry. Coming from an Indian background myself, I understand the importance of food and family. It really brings people together. I think that's what Aspire do here is amazing at mealtimes. Thank you, Heater. Ahmed, have you got any questions or anything that you'd like to ask?
Not really. I just want to mention that I myself come from a South Asian background, and back in South Asia, we always have our meals together as a family.
Yeah.
Anyone who have meals on their own, I mean, that's just not allowed. Everyone sits together, and we don't use spoons and forks. We just use our hands. Anyone who uses forks, you're seen as a foreigner. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, there's a lack of trust.
Yeah, so we all sit together, and sometimes we just put a big dish in the middle of the table, and everyone just takes it from that instead of having your own plates.
And it's lovely. It builds so much social interaction. It becomes a real focus of the day, even though everyone's got such, you know, singular lives. They might be working and busy. It's that moment of just kind of grounding, I suppose, isn't it?
Exactly. And if someone is missing, we will wait for them. Like, we all have to be there together to eat the meal. Otherwise, we will not have it. Yeah, absolutely. Are you, so what environment do you work in? I'm a teaching assistant right now, teaching maths and English to newcomers in this country.
And have you done anything with food? Have you sat with them at lunchtime? Have you managed to have any conversation?
Oh yeah, I'm looking after them all day long. So we have lunch together, everything, breakfast, everything.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly think that we all have a responsibility to just continue that, you know, I don't think they're even traditions. I think it's like, you know, it's very much a sort of prehistoric thing, really, that the concept of food is what brings people together. It's what binds people. And that gathering with food is something that, again, builds trust and community. It brings both of those things together. That actually a lot of the time, if you're eating, you know, Ahmed said, where you've got a whole big plate and you're waiting for people, if you're all eating from that same plate, that is trust, because there's nothing in there historically that would have poisoned anyone else, you know, back in the days of reigns and kings and queens and, you know, territories, that actually having that community of food where you're all eating together builds trust, builds communities and builds conversations, really. And I think, you know, we have a lot of other health and well-being concerns in our everyday life. And, you know, with the rise of anxiety and depression and obesity within young people, I think small changes can really have an impact.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
Well, next time, I think we should certainly do some food and talk about this. Lisa's nodding frantically.
I think as well, our challenge is a completely different setting to you guys in primary school, being in a sixth form, but we've had quite a lot of students that really want to do events where they really want to bring in their food for other people to share, which is so lovely and generous. And then I get really stuck on the whole health and safety of that. I just want to say, yeah, do it. Let's just bring all the food in. And then, of course, it's like, oh, but, you know, how do you, it sounds really ridiculous, but it kind of goes back to your business, like what you're talking about, the business stuff, Shelina, with that, the practicality sometimes of doing some of these events.
Yeah,
it is, you know, that side of it. If the students want to, you know, bring food that is traditional for their culture and want to share those things, how we go about actually making that happen, because it is quite often the students that are going to be the ones that are bringing that, you know, that expertise and that knowledge.
Well, it's very tricky. I think there is something that you know, I think with all of the fear mongering and concerns around dietary requirements, there are some obvious legitimate concerns around, you know, illness from food, but I think there's something quite, you know, traditional about bringing food to someone and letting them taste a sample of your you know, it's bringing a bit of your heart on a plate, really. It's who you are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think the benefit sometimes outweighs all the logistics. And I think my advice is to go on Amazon and buy the 14 allergen stickers. And basically, if anyone has cooked something at home, just get them to just go through what ingredients they used. So all I do is when I take, because I often take things to schools, because I that's what I do. I'm a feeder. So when I do, I put my allergen sticker on there, so the schools clearly know what allergens are in there, and I also just explain what I've cooked.
Right.
So I know that that's just a bit. It seems like a bit of work, but actually, if anyone does want to do that, if you have like a pro forma, which is essentially a sheet that just says, "Can you let me know which ingredients were used?" And then a sticker, then at least you break that barrier already by just having something that's there printed ready for them. You know, so I know if I'm going to make some, I don't know, a traditional Moroccan dish, I know everything that's being put in there, so I can quickly write that up whilst I'm doing it. And it becomes a learning experience as well, because people ask questions. Oh, how did you make that? What's in it? Those spices taste lovely. You know, this is different. And it's already written up, so it creates conversation. But yeah, I think making it easier for people to do that is often the first step, which is, you know, having a pro forma in place that enables you to tick all the boxes for health and safety, and then just opens the doors to let people do quite that, which is to share food, share their story, share their identities and where they're from.
That's such a good idea, and that just again shows that not being in that world, I just wouldn't even have thought of that. You know, an allergen list, tick, 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 brilliant.
Yeah, Amazon $5.99 for like a roll of 200.
I've just written that down.
Amazing. That's great. Then you can just go, yeah, let's do it. Bring all your food. That's so good. Thank you.
We'll all be writing. We'll all be on Amazon, won't we?
Yeah.
But sometimes in schools and colleges that there is a lot of, you know, there is a lot of paperwork. There is a lot, and that coming from, you know, a performing arts background, it can really put people off wanting. It doesn't put me off, but it can really put people off wanting to do things because there's so many hoops to jump through.
Yeah,
and just finding those simple ways to make it happen.
Yeah, I think
so empowering.
Strip away that bureaucracy and just think how can we make this happen and make it happen safely. I think those are the two things that are really valid. Clear labeling and process. It's always about process.
Amazing. Thank you.
No problem.
So getting those stickers in a minute. Amazon Prime. Thank you.
Also, I like the way you said, Shelina, that it opens a conversation, doesn't it? If you don't know what's in something, that's a whole conversation, isn't it, to have with someone about what is. And that's really
it can often become an argument as well if you're with people from different cultural backgrounds. So the arguments I've had, where I've witnessed arguments about jollof rice, which is a traditional rice across West Africa, and it's a red rice, very spicy, it's delicious, always eaten at parties mostly or celebrations, and Nigerians will say the Nigerians made it, Ghanaians will say the Ghanaians made it, Gambians have their own version, the Senegalese have their own version, and there are rows about it. And I just sort of sit there and I'm like, well, can I just taste all of them? I'm just going to sit here and watch what's happening. But I think that energy around food, you know, everyone's got their own roast potato secret, haven't they?
Yeah.
You know, everyone's got their perfect seasoning for chicken, or someone's always got the best veggie burger. And you could be just doing something a little bit different, but there's always an aha moment when you're like, oh, I've made it perfect this time. I really want to share that with everyone. So yeah.
And that's it. It's that sharing, isn't it, as well? That's so beautiful, actually. You know, understanding how someone else has made something that you love, or a family tradition. It's lovely.
Well, I've got a few more minutes. I'm happy to take any more questions. In the meantime, if there is anything that you do want to email me afterwards, you are more than welcome to email me. If you just jot down my email address, it's Shelina, so SHELINA at ShelinaCooks, COOKS.com. If there's anything that comes to your mind later, or you have an idea that you aren't sure about, that you want to try and, you know, do in your own setting, then I'd be welcome to support you and email you back. I do quite a lot on Instagram, which are basically recipes that I share, things that I cook at home, food that I'm inspired by. So that's Shelina Cooks as well. And the restaurant is La Case Mama, which is a Mauritian street kitchen. We are also an all-female management team, which is quite unheard of in the industry as well. And it's relevant to me and personal to me, because I think women in the industry deserve the chance to continue in senior roles, and having visibility makes all the difference when you see people who look like you doing things that you're told you can't do. Makes you want to do them. So yeah, I think there's if you want to learn more, then obviously that's all online as well. But it's been a real honor talking to everyone today. Like I said, if you do have any questions or just want to ask me anything, then drop me an email. If you're ever in Southampton, pop by and come and see me at the restaurant. Love to give you some food. But I hope you found it helpful, and I hope it was inspiring. I think the idea was to inspire and to give you an idea of how I became a food entrepreneur, really. But I think the ultimate aim for me isn't really, I'm not motivated by money. I'm not motivated by having multiple businesses. My motivation is to continue bringing people together with food. So I hope that was understood.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Thank you, Shelina. Thanks so much.